It's good to be back in session. After 6 weeks away from this place, it's good that we're all together working on some very important things. In the past 6 weeks, since we haven't been here in session working together, a lot has changed. America has been overtaken, really, not just by the coronavirus, but by the economic damage that it's caused. More than 30 million Americans have now filed for unemployment, and most believe we're approaching the highest unemployment we've had in this country since the Great Depression. It's a concern, and particularly troubling because you think about it, just a few months ago, back in February, we hit a 50-year low in terms of unemployment in this country. So we've gone from a strong and growing economy to one where so many people are out of work, so many businesses have been shuttered. Some of these businesses tell me they may have shuttered permanently. I hope not, but it's been a tough time. And at the same time, churches and schools have been closed. Some states have begun to reopen their economies, which is fantastic, but a majority of Americans are still living by very strict social distancing guidelines. I hear constantly from Ohioans how much this has upended their lives. Sometimes small business owners will tell me a heartbreaking story of how they spent 30, 40 years building a business, and now they've seen it be devastated. They're in a situation where they have no cash flow and can't keep the business open. At the same time, a lot of Americans have been teleworking. So they've still been working, but they haven't been going to the office or going to the factory. They've been working from home and figuring it out. Just like everything else, here in the Senate, we've been affected by this pandemic. As I said, we've been shut down for 6 weeks. And this started back in March. One of our colleagues actually came down with the virus, but it was really on the advice of health officials and public health experts that we decided not to reconvene. It was probably the safe thing to do at the time. Again, it's good we're back now. We're back now with the recommendation of the attending physician and other top medical experts. We've been wearing our masks dutifully when appropriate. We've been keeping our social distance. My desk is actually over there, but there was another senator over there, so they put me here, which is good. But we've been doing this successfully this week, and that's great because we need to be here representing the voice of the American people. However, I will tell you, during these 6 weeks when we weren't convening, there was a lot of work to be done too. And yet Congress was unable to do it. Why? Because unlike probably the majority of the people I represent, we don't telework. We work, yeah, we were home working hard, but we weren't involved in the debate here. We weren't involved in hearings. We weren't involved in debates on the floor. We weren't involved in voting. During that time period, those 6 weeks, by the way, over $500 billion was appropriated. In other words, this body chose to spend over $500 billion. That used to be a lot of money, over $500 billion of taxpayers' money, without people being here to weigh in, to vote, to offer amendments, to have a debate. And that legislation had to be done because it had to do with helping small businesses in particular, but also healthcare providers around the country, getting more testing, which was very important. But wouldn't it have been good had Congress been able to weigh in? But we couldn't. Why? We don't have the ability to remotely vote, much less engage in the debate, much less have hearings. So I think we should be able to do that. I think we should be able to meet and discuss things even when we can't physically be here in the Capitol. A couple of months ago, I introduced legislation here on the floor of the Senate with my colleague, Dick Durbin from Illinois. He's on the other side of the aisle. And in a bipartisan way, we said, let's let Congress vote remotely. Let's use safe, secure means to do that, and the technology is out there to do that. It's got to be safe. But let's let Congress weigh in and vote remotely when we can't meet. This last 6 weeks is an example of that, but it's not just about this pandemic. I've actually been talking about this for 25 years because I believe it's important Congress be able to meet when there is any reason that we can't come together or shouldn't come together. After 9/11, a lot of people were more focused on this because a terrorist act, particularly a bioterrorist act, could have the same effect, of course. There have been periods of time where Congress has not been able to meet here, and there have been other periods of time like during the Cold War when there was actually a bunker set up in the hills of West Virginia somewhere for us to convene for fear there could be a nuclear attack. So Congress has thought about this before, but Congress has never been able to put in place the ability for us to vote remotely, for us to have debate remotely, for us to have hearings remotely. And I think that's too bad, because we are the voice of the people. We represent individual congressional districts on the other side of the Capitol. We represent individual states here. The Constitution set it up so that we're out there listening to the people we represent, and we come here and represent that voice. The executive branch has its own role, and it's a very important one. But it shouldn't take over the legislative branch role, because they're different. And the founders intended it that way, to have this separation of powers. By the way, other countries have done this. The United Kingdom has begun to conduct its proceedings remotely. The EU has started to vote remotely, the European Union. And there are several other countries that have come up with one way or another to work remotely, to telework in essence. Also, by the way, about 14 states have figured this out, so that they can convene meetings and so on, and some even vote remotely. So I think it's time to do it. Last week, the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which I chair, had the first remote hearing in the history of the Congress, I'm told. And it worked really well. We had 3 witnesses. We had several members of the Senate participate. The witnesses were all around the country, so we didn't have to call them here to Washington. We didn't have to gather as a group and therefore risk one of us infecting another or exposing us to the coronavirus. The witnesses were testifying from their homes, sometimes from a living room. In one case, one of the witnesses actually testified from the cab of a pickup truck because she was at her sister's place and didn't want to do it in the house, so she got in the pickup truck with her laptop, and it worked great. It worked great. We were able to ask questions, get answers. It worked just like a regular hearing. So I was appreciative that the Rules Committee allowed us to do that. The technology, by the way, is, in a sense, off-the-shelf technology because it's their technology. They have it. We didn't have to recreate the wheel. But it worked last week. We used it. I think it can be a template for other hearings. And by the way, today, I'm pleased to say, I participated in 2 more remote hearings. So even though we're here in session, we're having remote hearings because it is not wise for us to all gather together with the staff and with the Capitol Hill Police and others. It's safer for us to do this remotely. And by the way, both these hearings went well. One was the Finance Committee, the other was the Homeland Security, Government Affairs Committee. By the way, our hearing last week is online. You can check it out, psi.gov. The 2 hearings today were both online, live streamed today. So this does not mean that you cut out the public. In fact, I would say just the opposite. During these last 6 weeks, we could have had hearings every week and kept the public informed as to what we were thinking and gotten more input from the public in an official way and a way that was so transparent that everybody could be engaged in it who wanted to, just like C-SPAN, except it's online. So this is something we can now do, and I hope we will continue to do it. I hope that we will be sure that as we do this, we also take seriously this idea of not just having hearings and not just having the ability to interact as Republicans and Democrats, but actually have the ability to vote remotely when we shouldn't be here. Again, it needs to be safe, and I think we can do that. I'm convinced that if we put our mind to it, the technology is not the problem. The problem is tradition. I'm not against tradition. A lot of them make sense, but you know what? Tradition around here has changed a lot over the years. There didn't used to be a filibuster, as an example, which is how we live right now to get 60 votes for everything. That's okay. I'm not saying it's a bad tradition to have changed, but the point is we change traditions around here a lot, and it's time for us to look at this. It's time for us essentially to catch up. Most of the people I represent are doing this. They're teleworking to one extent or another. Most people in America today are realizing that you can actually get a lot done online, remotely. Today I talked to some healthcare professionals who were telling me about, one of the rare silver linings in this dark cloud that's descended upon our country is the fact that telemedicine has been proven over the past couple of months to be pretty darn effective. And in many cases, it has been used because people are concerned and afraid about coming to a hospital or going to their doctor, but they can get the advice through telemedicine. I talked to some educators today, and in fact also talked to the Ohio Farm Bureau today and talked to a mom who's at home with her kids during the day now because her kids are home from school, because schools have been closed. And we talked about how much she's been able to learn about telelearning and how there is an opportunity here to do more outside of the classroom. Not that we shouldn't get back to classrooms, I think that we should. And I think that's an opportunity for kids to interact, which is important. But we can also do more after school in terms of telelearning we are beginning to acknowledge. So this is just another example of it. This is a change that I think must be made to prepare us for the realities of this 21st century, where these contingencies come up. It's a pandemic today, it may be something else tomorrow. By the way our legislation works for voting is it's temporary. So I don't think this should be the norm. I think it should be only in emergencies, and only when the majority leader and the Democratic leader, so in a bipartisan way, decide it's the appropriate thing to do. And then, under our legislation, every 30 days, Congress would have to vote, presumably remotely, to reaffirm it. Otherwise, it ends. So it would be temporary, it would be in emergencies only, and it would be up to Republicans and Democrats alike at leadership level to decide it's time to try remote voting. And to be sure that we, as the members of the People's House across the way and the members of the world's greatest deliberative body here in the Senate, as we're called, have the chance to represent the millions of people who we are charged with representing by being their voice here on the United States Senate floor. I hope we can, along with the times, change here and begin to be more effective at representing those constituents. Mr. President, I'm also here